The anime Jiisan Baasan Wakagaeru revolves around Shouzou and Ine Saitou, who have lived happily married for a very long time, to the extent that they cannot remember anything before that period. Even in their old age, with wrinkles and cracked limbs, the power of their love shines through their precious bond. Then, randomly one day, they wake up to find themselves young again. Despite their new, youthful, and attractive bodies, Shouzou and Ine remain together as they always have been. The story of Jiisan Baasan Wakagaeru follows these young old couple as they live their daily lives, spend time with family, and defy the expectations of youth from their new ages. The episode begins with a man asks his wife what she would like to do if she were young, and hearing this sudden question, she asks him why he is saying these things. So the man explains that when they were young, they were both very poor and that he even made it impossible to take her on a honeymoon. So she asks him to stay calm. After all, she already feels happy just talking to him, and as they walk a little further, she notices that they are close to the place where they planted the wedding apple tree of them in this. The man comments that it has been 60 years, and she reminds him that the tree they planted ended up being broken due to a typhoon. In this, they arrive at the tree in question and notice that it is still standing thanks to the incredible power of nature. I look more at the tree. She sees a golden apple hanging from one of the branches. I return home. The man looks in the mirror and suddenly he notices his face rejuvenating, and when he runs to his wife, he realizes that she too has returned to her youth. The first thing that comes to his mind is to take her on the much-deserved honeymoon that they didn't have. And after that, they welcome his granddaughter Mino, who is soon amazed to see her younger grandparents, and as they sit down to talk, Mino asks that your grandfather doesn't cut his hair because he's already doing really well that way. Shej says that his bangs bother him, but he decides to leave his hair like that because she's insisting so much, and in the middle of the conversation, Mino plays with his grandmother, asking to marry Shouzou, and after this crazy thing, she ends up leaving her grandparents' house. She comments to her father that they are getting younger, all of a sudden, and he doesn't understand what his daughter is talking about. Meanwhile, some elderly people comment about Shouzou and Ine and notice that they are very missing when he remembers that Ine was going through health problems, and then they are sad that they won't be able to see their friends in the park so soon. But as soon as they say this, Shouzou appears there, leaving all the ladies slightly excited about this gentleman. They notice that they will no longer have any chance with the 70-year-old girls. After all, Shouzou will have more of an advantage than them for having become young again. So Ine goes to them to serve him tea, but when she takes the drink, the man who was already nervous to see, she drops it on her clothes, and Ine tries to clean him and says she will bring him a towel, and going back a little to the past. Shou's son tries to invite him to live with him and his granddaughter, but Shou refuses to leave his home and states that he won't even give him a hand in this. His son remembers that both his and his wife's bodies have already reached their limits. Therefore, he just wants to be able to take care of them. But Shouzou explains that this is the land of his ancestors, which they have protected for centuries, and that's why he can't just abandon his place in it. Kei tells Ine that he will be fine, regardless of his choice, and Ine says that they can go anywhere as long as she remains by her husband's side, and on the day next, CD returns to her in-laws' house and brings with her the ingredients she didn't ask for while she heads there. Informs that Ine went to a meeting at the community center, and when I noticed her better, I saw her visibly startled by something. But I assumed that she was like that because she didn't know where she was in this. She made the excuse that she needed to use the bathroom just to get away from him. I do this. She notices that her father-in-law is very handsome, so she tries to calm down. After all, she can't forget to tell Yoshiaki that. And after the whole family gets together, Mino's father discovers that his daughter was trying to play with her father. And then she states that Shouzou is much kinder than him, and in addition, she makes it clear that it was all just a joke. However, the atmosphere was so high that she ended up losing control, and if Shik asks Cade what's wrong with her, not having told her this before, she explains that this is a complicated subject, so she thought it would be better to wait to tell her in person. What is she saying? But the girl insists and says that there is no problem with that. But CD already remembers that her father is present, and Uncle in turn explains that he only has eyes for his wife Ine. But he still receives the concealer to stay smart, And at the end of the family meeting, they say goodbye, and I would notice that Osik is visibly tired from work and strokes. His head. He remembers his childhood when she would pat his head to congratulate him on his effort. Jealous and asks her grandmother to pet her head too and promptly says goodbye to her granddaughter, but Yoshiaki rushes the girl saying that they should return home. The next day, a group of elderly people talk about such a sports competition, but they regret it because Tamad always wins the competition. This makes them think about giving up, but suddenly Choso appears there all pumped up about it. The gentlemen ask him to participate in the multi-sport gymkhana alongside them. Although Choso tries to refuse, he ends up being dragged to the community center. After that, the day of the jink arrives, and one of the elderly people comments to the others that Min and Ti might not participate, as the other members are already over 50 years old. Therefore, he guarantees that Kitty's chance of winning is very high. But he is disappointed to see that their opponents will be a bunch of old people, and D states that if they run hard, these old men won't even be able to finish a lap, so they must control themselves. L, you laugh at the other elderly people's faces and state that they are just there to have fun. After all, victory of his grandchildren is already guaranteed that Sano informs that they prepared a triumphal weapon for that year. In this case, he is talking about the couple left. The apple farm, and/or see that senior on his face once again disdaining the couple left. But soon after doing so that Chozo and In appear there and leave everyone with their mouths open. And then you ask if they would be Seityu's grandchildren, and Chozo informs that it is he himself to Saitou. That being said, they begin G-charms and begin with a tug of war between Minami and Kitam. So Cho keeps pulling the rope, but he starts to lose. I see this and Tai helps him by cheering him on, and this Chu draws strength from beyond and ends up with the boys, and after that, they go to the race gymkhana. So King Suck asks them to compensate for the defeat of the tug of war. In the race in this shift states that he was already thinking about doing this from the beginning. And meanwhile, the narrator explains that the brothers and Garash of the Quid are doing well because even though they are so clumsy, the love between them and their athleticism compensates for this barrier, and on the other side of the audience. The boy's grandfather cheers them on and explains that they have both been practicing sports together for over 10 years. Therefore, he already knows each other's rhythm very well. While the elderly members of the Seitou team spend for them, the couple manages to reach the brothers very easily, even though they are tied to each other, and Shoso states that he has lived with his wife for more than 70 years, so he already knows how she would handle it. They reach the arrival made before the boys, and after being defeated in all the other contests, the brothers are disappointed, and Shaw notices that the world has much more incredible people than he imagines, and the boy's grandfather is irritated by all the debauchery they did to his grandchildren's faces. And in addition, he is indignant with Shoso, because in addition to having stolen his Ine 70 years ago, Choso also just stole his grandchildren's smiles in this. He tries to cheer up the boys and says that they can compete in next year's Jink, and suddenly Inai comes to them to talk and apologize for being so hard on them. Grandfather Rook deduces that she must be with Choso now, but she explains that he is busy being pampered by the others, so she sits down to eat with them and soon notices that King's grandchildren Suk look a lot like him when he was young, and speaking of Rux, youth, and Inai, remembers when he declared himself to her, and upon hearing this, the grandchildren discover why their grandfather is fighting with Saitou's team, and this Inai tells the boys to improve, to try to challenge them next year. And a week after Jin Shota, he goes to his grandfather's Chozo, a manned house, to deliver a thank you gift for that other day, and that Mino opens the door. And then the boy starts having a tremble when he sees it, but in the end he manages to deliver the bag that his grandfather sent. He explains that it is a gift for Choso, and when he sees that the boy went to all the trouble to take the gift, Mino thanks him and asks Shouta to come in and inside. He explains that he had no idea that the couple were her grandparents, and he starts to get a little shy because he is alone with a girl who is super popular among girls and boys, and besides, Mino always seems to be super happy with himself. Shota having difficulty socializing with people, so Shota decides to hide his anxiety by playing on his cell phone. Meanwhile, Cade and In watch the two from afar, and Cade assumes that this boy is her boyfriend. In this case, Shouzou goes to the two to understand this situation and finds out that Shite was just there to deliver a gift, and during the conversation, Straw notices that Mino's Vod appears to be a nice guy. Unlike Ine and Cade, who look at him with a scary look on their faces, as if he were a predator. In this conversation continues and Mino describes Shar as a boy who is good at sports and very intelligent, but he notices that she is exaggerating a little. In the meantime, they talk to each other about their supposed relationship being able to work out. Choso asks the boy if he likes someone, but Zinho interrupts just in time. Shay decides to go home, so Mino regrets not being able to talk to him alone for longer. Then his grandfather realizes that he is the only one who knows about her crush on him. And the next day, Mino talks to his grandparents about the beginning of their relationship. And Jose explains that I received a dating request from Ine. He was very happy, but his father wanted to arrange a marriage for him with his best friend's daughter, and hearing this, Mino asks his grandfather what he did to arrange the situation, and Tayoso reports that he simply got into a fight with his father and tells Ine that she went to the girl who was promised to marry Choso and explained to her what was happening and how. This girl was also already liking someone else. They ended up having no problem with that at all. He asked his grandmother to pretend that she was his rival so that they could reenact this remarkable moment. And although reluctant at first, she decided to do it for her granddaughter. And they noticed that she was basically a bully from that time, because she probably sent the girl running because she looked deep into Mino's eyes, telling her not to lay a hand on her lover, and the girl ends up hugging her, saying that she loves her grandfather, but she also loves her grandmother. And in morals, this anime, it's very crazy. It's everything you said for the love of God. It's every joke that's going to be played here. I just want to see where this goes. So I'm going to try to keep posting the episodes. Leave a like, subscribe, and also comment below. If you want more episode of this crazy thing, that is this Crown and Crown anime. So I'll see you in the next video. And our episodes begin today with these two boys walking in the garden. One of them tells the other that farming isn't great at all, with a perception that only old folks do it and there's nothing wonderful about it. However, in this day and age, it's up to the youth to go to the city and enjoy themselves. His friend expresses a desire to go to Tokyo and make lots of money, while the other wants to leave quickly and live alone. They believe that by going to Tokyo, they'll find love and live a beautiful life. Suddenly, they see Ine in the garden and wonder who she is, since they've never seen her before. Normally, they would only see the old couple there. When Ine greets them, the boys become very embarrassed, their faces turning red, and they quickly leave. They wonder who this beautiful girl is, as they've never seen her before, but assume she must be the old couple's daughter or granddaughter. Suddenly, Shouzou arrives in a carriage, and Ine joins him, bidding farewell to the boys. Then the scene shifts to the past, where we see the grandfather reading the newspaper, and the grandmother asks if she can throw away some advertisements as she notices a clothing sale. She quickly gets up, telling she'll prepare dinner. Back in the present, Ine asks Shouzou if he went somewhere today while he reads the newspaper. He says he just went for a walk, and Ine notices a strange box next to him, opens it, and finds a beautiful white dress inside. She's overjoyed, thanks him, and says it's very beautiful, both of them getting emotional and teary-eyed. Then we see Shouzou and Ine watching a movie on TV, and Shouzou says he tried watching it because Mino recommended it. He comments that young people these days watch extremely intense things, and honestly, he can't understand why it's good, but even if they don't agree on everything, they can still fully understand each other. He tells Ine there's no point in doing such things, as they're just for show. The scene shifts to Mino opening the door to the old woman and asking if she's Yosagi's daughter, because she's grown so much and become very beautiful. She asks if her grandmother is at home, as she brought some plants and vegetables. Mino is very hesitant and doesn't know what to do, because she couldn't understand anything due to the old woman's strong accent. Then Ine appears and tells Mino that the old lady's name is Ketcha, and she works at the fish store. Mino tells her that Ketcha's accent is very strong, and she couldn't understand anything she said. Ketcha asks Ine how it happened to her, and Ine says she became a little younger. Ketcha then pinches Mino's cheeks, plays with them, and asks if she wants to become her grandson's bride, which greatly upsets Mino. The grandmother, Ine, tells her that she won't allow Mino to become anyone's bride so early. There's still plenty of time ahead of her. Later that evening, we see the girl playing on her phone, named Shiori, while the grandmother talks about Shiori spending the night with them, seemingly discussing it with her guardian, Takahiro. She reassures him not to worry, as everything will be fine, and compliments him on his very beautiful daughter. Then we see Shiori talking to herself about how she ended up there because she had a fight with her father. When she ran to her grandmother's house, she was amazed because she couldn't believe her grandmother had become young. Then Ani comes in and tells her how delighted she is that Shiori will stay with them tonight, asking if there's anything specific she'd like to eat. Shiori says there's nothing particular, and she's fine as is. As Shiori remembers her father talking to her about her career plans, asking what she plans to do with her academic achievements, if she intends to enter the medical field. She gets very angry and tells him she's not as smart as him. Her fault. We return to reality where Shiori is lost in her dreams, having escaped from her studies, her father who raised her well, and also from thinking about her career path and all her friends, leaving her lonely. She says she's so stupid because she worked so hard all this time. Then she cries a lot, while Ine puts her hand on her shoulder and starts talking to her, saying that those who have nothing don't cry like this. Her tears are proof enough that she hasn't given up. She's still fighting. Then the grandmother recalls what happened in the past before taking a bite of an apple and asks Shiori what she wants to become in the future. Shiori responds that she'll become a doctor and cure her grandmother's illness. She tells her it doesn't matter what other adults say around her. She's her beloved granddaughter, and she loves her very much. There's no reason her grandmother wouldn't spoil her grandchildren. At that time, Shiori cries a lot, and her grandmother prepares dinner for her. Then the scene shifts to the past, and the grandmother recalls what happened previously when she and her husband, Shouzou, had a conversation. She apologizes to him, saying they can't go on their vacation because she fell ill again. Shouzou reassures her, saying her health is more important now. With a broad smile, she tells him, "Okay, Shouzou, take your shaki and go for a walk on the beach." He responds saying he can go, but it would be better and more beautiful if she goes with him. She jokingly asks him if he wants to see her in a swimsuit to that extent, and he enthusiastically agrees, saying, "Yes, of course, I want to show you off to all the other men." She then tells him, "No, my friend. In that case, you'll be a cuckold who doesn't care about his wife. If you want to show off me, you should show off my morals, not my body in front of people." We return to reality where the grandmother, Ine, remembers the previous events and thinks about what she will wear when she goes to the beach. She wants something that covers her chest and body so that others don't look at her. Then Shiori speaks to her and says, "Grandma, do what pleases you and wear the appropriate clothes. You're a beautiful woman and still beautiful." The grandmother responds, "But I'm still old on the inside." The other tells her that doesn't matter to her right now. Then Shiori tells her, "Don't do that. Do you want to make the man who loves you lose his love in that way?" At that moment, Ine interrupts their conversation and says she'll think about it while preparing dinner, but it seems like she's avoiding Shiori. Afterward, the house phone rings, and the cat meows as the grandmother answers the phone. She hears a voice saying, "Hello, Mom, it's me." She asks, "What do you mean, is this Yoshaki?" He confirms that it's him and explains that he's currently suffering from a cold and sinusitis, and his throat is in a very bad condition. His mother understands that something is not right, so she records the call. Yoshaki talks about feeling that his voice is getting younger, thinking it will become more mature. His mother replies that his voice has always been like this. When she goes to work in the garden, her voice becomes deeper. However, Yoshaki abruptly changes the subject and tells her that he needs some money, specifically 200 gold pieces. This worries his mother even more, and she tells him that he's put himself in a mess. She informs him that she'll note this down, which he thanks her for and appreciates what she does for him. After that, she talks to him on the phone and tells him that she's not his mother, which angers the man, and we later discover that this man is one of the scamming fraudsters. Then Ine sits next to her husband, Shouzou, where they listen to the news bulletin about a man arrested by the police. Shouzou asks his wife to be cautious so that nothing happens to her. The grandmother, Ine, says that it's up to each person to protect themselves. She then tells him that most calls come around 6 in the evening, which is very indicative of Ani then takes off her glasses as she no longer needs them. Her granddaughter remarks that perhaps she caught the eye of some young men as well. Ani mentions that they can't even read the daily 6 equalities on the wall calendar, shocking her granddaughter as she didn't expect all of this from her. She then asks her grandmother to read the newspaper from her position, and Ani indeed starts reading the newspaper. Meanwhile, Shouzou enters and asks them what they are doing. The granddaughter answers and tells him what happened. After that, Mino asks her grandmother to read the words indicating her, but Mino couldn't do that because the headlines are written in bold fonts, so she can easily see them. Mino talks to her grandmother and asks if they ever held hands and went out before. The grandmother says no, they never did anything like that before. It would be like public display and telling everyone that they are dating. Then the grandfather adds that once the couple becomes old and wise, holding hands becomes a necessary task to help with walking. The granddaughter responds, saying they don't even have a bit of romance. Later, we see Ani and Shouzou on the way, and Ani comments to Shouzou that it's nice to walk to the neighborhood stores. He replies, saying that they gave us a lot of extra stuff like Napa cabbage. She comments on how cold the weather is today, surprising Shouzou, who asks why she's not wearing gloves on her hands. She thinks to herself that he noticed, and she's trying to gauge her husband's feelings about such things, but it seems like nothing specific is happening. Shouzou considers holding her hand, but he feels it would be like accepting what Mino said earlier, somehow making him feel as if he's lost at something. Then she asks him if he's not feeling cold, to which he replies no. She thinks to herself not to say she's okay, but walking together like this isn't bad either. He tells her they bought a lot of chicken today and were given Napa cabbage too, so they should hurry home and warm themselves up. They then go to the doctor together, and the doctor and nurse are astonished. The nurse says she can't believe her eyes, and the doctor adds that he also can't believe it, but they are definitely his parents as they were in their youth. The doctor talks to them and asks if their condition is good now. Shouzou says yes, and he feels extremely fit. The doctor says they will examine everything possible and discuss matters later. Then he examines them and asks Ani to breathe more steadily, noting that her pulse used to be fast but is slow now. He asks if they became young again, and then he says he will provide detailed results later and leaves. Later, the doctor reveals that they found cancer in Annie's liver, especially since she recently recovered from stomach and intestinal inflammation. The first thing they'll do is a CT scan and blood tests, and based on the results, they'll start anti-cancer treatment when the time is right. The doctor, who happens to be their son, speaks emotionally about how the reason he became a doctor was to save his mother. Despite feeling powerless at times, he finds solace in knowing he did everything he could for her. He reminisces about happy days planting trees together, harvesting fruits, and their young son playing with them. They were all crying, deeply moved by the memories of happiness and family togetherness. After aging, a cyclone hits their garden, causing it to collapse completely with fruits and trees falling to the ground. The grandfather and grandmother try to help each other fix the trees to prevent them from dying. They notice an apple on one of the trees they tended to, and they pick it, amazed by its golden color. The grandmother explains that this apple gives her a strange feeling as if it wants them to eat it. They start eating the apple and find it delicious and juicy, which is rare for this time of year. On the other hand, the tree they tended to breaks and falls to the ground, completely collapsing. We then see the grandmother also falling to the ground in a strange place. Then she stands up again, surprised by her surroundings. Suddenly, she sees an hourglass floating in the air, almost about to fall on her. And if it did, she would have died. At that moment, she wakes up from her dream and tells her husband about the strange dream of the giant hourglass. Her husband reveals that he had the same dream. He tells her that today marks their 58th wedding anniversary, which delights the wife. She expresses how time flies by wonderfully because she's with him. He asks if there's anything she wants to eat, and she mentions red bean rice secretly. When she opens the fridge, she's surprised to find a piece of cake, which she takes to her husband, thinking he didn't prepare anything. However, he surprises her by revealing that he secretly prepared a meal for her too. They hide their love for each other and start eating the cake, making the grandmother's sugar level rise. But the grandfather is extremely happy. The episode ends on this happy note, inviting viewers to subscribe to the channel for more upcoming episodes. The episode begins with Shouzou and Ine preparing lunch. Shouzou mentions that he started working on the farm right after elementary school and has no memories of studying. Ine tells him she remembers attending a girls' school in Tokyo, but it felt more like a dream with unlimited white rice and water at the turn of a tap. However, the war took everything away, so they returned to the countryside, which was like punishment due to the mud. Yet meeting him made her realize some mud is bearable, unlike the lack of amenities in Tokyo. Shouzou asks about these things, but Ine keeps it a secret, feeling no need to share. Shouzou pleads for her to confide, but she refuses. Later, Shouzou and Ine sit with their granddaughter, who shows them a device for preventing dementia. Shouzou, intrigued, thinks it's a children's toy with flashing lights and a small screen, but it's actually a video game with Minko cards, Bigoma scrolls, and chase. When he watches TV, he discovers it's the same game with wandering bodies, and Shiori explains the consequences of breaking into someone's home or harming main characters. She knew her grandparents couldn't handle video games, so watching them seamlessly adapt to it surprises her. They try to hit the characters in the head to minimize suffering and play for a long time, but it becomes too violent, leaving nothing else to do in the game. At this time, their granddaughter, Mino, enters the house and finds Shiori sitting alone. She rushes to hug her because they haven't seen each other for a long time. However, Shiori coldly asks her to stop clinging to her. Mino tells her it's been a while since she last saw her and notes their relationship has cooled. They attend the same school but in different buildings, making it hard for them to meet. Mino tells Shiori she knows she loves her grandparents a lot since she lives with them. Shiori admits she doesn't love them, but feels obligated to act like she does. Shouzou overhears this conversation and realizes his granddaughter hates him, which deeply upsets him. Mino asks Shiori to apologize to their grandfather and retract her words, but she refuses. Eventually, Mino approaches her grandfather and apologizes, as she truly loves him and her grandmother. That night, as Shouzou sleeps, he dreams of becoming an old man again, a recurring dream since their youth returned. He recalls his wife having the same dream. Unsure of its significance, they enjoy their rejuvenated youth but still have many things left undone. They plan for a second honeymoon since Ine isn't an old woman anymore. In the middle of the night, Shouzou wakes up and tells Ine he's become old again, feeling no pain currently, but fearing she loved him more when he was young. Ine reassures him that she loves the man named Saitou Shouzou, regardless of his age, as he hasn't changed at all in her eyes. Shouzou reflects that he used to think being old was bad, but it's actually disrespectful to the life he's lived with Ine, where age was just a convenient excuse to let go of certain things. It seems like they're deeply immersed in reclaiming their youth. Even though my body remains as it is, whenever it's time for our trip to Atomy, we'll go regardless. I shouldn't abandon the enjoyment of life just because I've aged. Grandma, I fell in love with those eyes, she said. Then they go to the clinic, where the doctor asks what's happening with their bodies. Grandma says that's what they want to know. The doctor explains that their kidneys and liver show signs of aging expected for their age, so they shouldn't stress themselves too much. Then Grandma asks about his condition, and the doctor says he's fine, but his physical functions are slightly better than they were before he became young again. His body will gradually return to its original age. But he's worried about Grandma, as she now has the body of a healthy 20-year-old woman. If her body ages gradually from this point, he wonders how much time she'll have. Grandma tells him she's not afraid of death, but given their situation, her husband will likely precede her. She doesn't want to die alone and wonders if she'll live another 70 years. She doesn't want to die alone. Then the doctor sees the grandfather and grandmother, saying he feels closer to her than usual. The grandfather and grandmother go back to being just themselves. Grandpa tells Grandma he still has a lot of vitality even in his current state. He plays with his son, who tells him not to stress himself too much. Grandpa reassures him, saying he's fine. The son tells Grandpa that if he beats him on their trip to Atami, he'll book him a room with an outdoor bath. When Grandpa hears this, he's thrilled and ready to play. The son thinks to himself, his grip is much stronger than I thought. He's probably worried about accidentally hurting me, so maybe I should use some force. Finally, Grandpa wins. Later, they're in the market, and Grandpa remarks, "Since I became young again, many people stare at us. I'm sure we don't look like a married couple." He distances himself from Grandma, who asks why he's keeping his distance. He replies that everyone is staring at them, and while it's fine at home, in places like this, teeming with people, it might be better if they pretend not to be married. An employee approaches them, asking if he can help them find a gift for their granddaughter. Grandpa thinks to himself, maybe I should let him think she's my granddaughter. He tells the employee they're shopping with their granddaughter. Grandma corrects him, saying it's not true. He's her husband. She doesn't blame him for thinking otherwise, but appreciates his understanding. Later, on their way home, Grandma asks why he wanted to lie. She doesn't want to be anything other than his wife. Grandpa apologizes, and they continue. Then Grandpa sees sweets in front of him, saying they used to eat them when they were young. But lately, his wife has stopped eating them in front of him, fearing he might develop diabetes in his old age. So he refrains from eating them. He asks if she wants some, but she declines, saying she's not hungry at the moment, but will eat them later. Grandma adds that her husband feels some effects of returning to youth, but his old illness might come back. He loves sweets and she loves them too. He watches his health and doesn't eat it, so I can't eat it in front of him. I know I'm exaggerating to consider his feelings, but if he's nearby, I can't eat this, Mommy Devoko. Suddenly he wakes up. The grandfather stands behind her, so the grandmother is shocked by that and looks at him, while she's very tense and tells him that I swear to you, I wasn't trying to eat it behind your back. So the grandfather tells the grandmother to stop acting considerate towards him and tells her that you're not doing anything wrong. My dear, beautiful, and dives. Then he starts taking one of these sweets and tells her that seeing your happy face while you eat, this is the best medicine for me, and starts feeding her a piece of the candy. And she also takes some of it, and they are in the peak of happiness. Then the grandmother tells him about memories from her past and remembers when her father and mother died and losing her home. So she went to live with her mother's relatives and worked for them. Her father was very rich when he was alive, since he was acting arrogantly with my mother's family. My relatives avoided me. The first problem was not understanding each other. They used the phrase EKs to refer to everything and give me this. I didn't feel like we were speaking the same language. Their culture, which allowed them to endure cold and didn't allow for easy acceptance of strangers, made me speak in a Tokyo accent that seemed unfamiliar to them, and some mocked me for it. I didn't feel comfortable at my mother's family's house. So after finishing work in the fields, I spent my time in the local shrine, and one day while I was there, this young man came to talk to me, so I told him that I had moved here from Tokyo not too long ago, and he knew me by my name, so Sasaki tried to get up for him. This handsome young man said there's no problem and no need to get up for him. Then she asks him who he is, and he tells her I'm Sado. I plant apples nearby. Seeing a girl sitting here alone made me wonder a little, and suddenly Sasaki's stomach makes sounds indicating she's hungry. So this young man offers her some food, so she tells him, I'm not used to it, and the food here is salty and sweet, and tells him it would be better for you not to do this, and refuses to take the food from him. She tells him that he must have heard rumors about her, or is it conceivable that you intend to get rid of me? Saitou reassures her with a smile and tells her not to worry at all. Just eat this food. I don't know anything about who you are or where you came from, but whatever the reason for staying hungry, I don't want people to say that our village can't help a girl in need of a place to go. Have a good day. Then Saitou bids her farewell and leaves. Sasaki thinks to herself that if there are people like him here too, in this culture of endurance, kindness can be found. She starts eating some of the food and indeed finds it salty. On another day, she finds the young man Saitou communicating with her day by day, telling her that this shrine is on my way home, so I can't help but wonder. Then they point her to the bus station, which is on the mountainside and closer to her house and away from people's eyes. I preferred this place to that one. You're really terrible at understanding things, she says to him. He sits down next to her and Sasaki tells him not to take my words to heart. If you don't understand that, the road is still long ahead, so be more careful, please. Suddenly, Saitou is very embarrassed and apologizes to her. Sasaki notices their apparent confusion and tension, realizing that he lacks stability and doesn't seem to have received a good education. To what extent will this man be able to influence my heart? Is he worth watching? Back to the present. They're sitting next to each other and the grandmother, Sasaki, says, "He has succeeded in completely influencing me." And we see the grandchildren happily eating delicious sweets. On the other side, we see the grandfather, haunted by the dream of the hourglass once again, even though he hasn't seen it recently. He says, "I've been waiting for this moment. If the heart of the hourglass brought me back to my old age, then if its heart turns again, it will make me young again. I wish for that. Since I have this opportunity, I must verify the matter properly." Then he looks at what comes out of this hourglass, finding sand, and says, "I can imagine the surprise on my wife's face." He flips the hourglass and wakes up from his sleep to find himself young again, and starts brushing his teeth while waiting for his wife to be surprised. His wife tells him to make sure to comb her hair, which got tangled during his sleep, and he is shocked by her reaction as it's disappointing to him. Then they sit together watching this hourglass, and the wife says there's something that piques her curiosity. "Do you think we won't age or die in its sands?" The husband replies, "I think that's likely to happen. The hourglass is probably designed to lose sand over time. It will eventually empty of sand completely, and I don't know what will happen when that happens. I believe it will be the end of this youth miracle, and there's no need to worry, my dear. We won't live forever. Our lives won't be longer than our children's or the rest." Then they hold her hands, and he tells her that she's the only person he won't leave behind. So don't worry. They embrace each other, and the wife thanks him for everything he's done for her. Our episode ends. Stay tuned for future episodes of this anime, but don't forget to subscribe to the channel and activate the bell button to receive all the latest updates. The two boys from a few episodes ago wander talking about how Tokyo must have a lot of foreign cars in comparison to where they live. Now, as this place only has light cars and trucks, since this place does get a lot of snow, cars with low heck would definitely have problems. And even if they got a sports car, there aren't too many places that could service it here. Anna then spots the boys asking for their time, and they blush in return. She tells them tomorrow she'll be spraying a lot of pesticides in the area. If they find the smell too bad, they can walk another way home, even though it isn't bad for them. Then Shu appears in his pesticide-spraying vehicle, which the young boy mistake for a Ferrari. At the Igarashi residence, Grandpa Igarashi had asked for Shota's help cleaning the attic. But why did he have to ask Grandpa Sao for help? The second floor has stuff. Grandpa Igarashi, father and grandfather had piled up things such as a carved table and a wooden box and scrolls of Yoshitsune's legend. All things Shu found to be a gold mine. Grandpa Gashi wants everything thrown away, but stops when it comes to this black long chest known as a nangmuai. It's most likely a trove containing all of Shota's grandma's belongings. Hike touched the box, thinking of his beloved Misako. He asked Shota and Shu to leave him alone while he decided on what to do with it. Outside, Shota had already cleverly planned to call Northtown's Board of Education. He wanted them to safekeep all the cultural assets. His grandfather had Story with everything finished Hake planned to tear down the storage house in the future. His kids decided not to continue the family farm. Having built their houses in the city, there's no one here that can really maintain it anymore. He plans to call his demolition buddies to take care of it around. The back Shu asks if Shay plans on living here in the future. He's not sure, but he knows he wants to go to Tokyo to become a soccer athlete. But inheriting his grandfather's things doesn't sound too bad to him with he's able to hear him. He's shocked. Soccer athlete, office worker, farmer. No matter what job he'd land himself, it's this very land. That's brought him this far. Turning his back on the homeland that raised him would feel so wrong. So someday he'll want to run the farm himself. This brings Hai to tears as he tells his buddy the storage room. Tear down is off, and the two grandfathers bond in tears over Shaw in the local university library, which is open into the public on weekends. She thought she'd study for the exams like a uni student. That was the plan. However, she lacked the motivation. She remembered saying something terrible to her grandfather when they were talking about studying. She told him there was no way he could teach her since he didn't even go to high school. Looking over, She then noticed Shu was here as well, astonished to find him here. She calmed herself, pretending not to see him, but now she really can't focus. She begins to spy on him and sees he has high school textbooks which seem to trouble him. Shori then remembered her grandmother mentioning her grandfather not going to school. Not for a lack of wanting to, but because he couldn't, she wondered if he would actually be an intelligent student. If the times allowed it, seeing him gave her motivation, so she got to work and later at Shu's place. Shori thanked him as she was able to get single-digit rank in the midterm exams in Mino's class. She overhears two of her classmates talk about the hot couple from South Town. They ask Mino if she knows anything about them, but she denies even hearing about them, making an excuse to head home, getting some dessert with Xiao. She knows no one would believe the couple or her grandparents anyways, however Shai tells her. She doesn't need to think so deeply about this. Mino thanks him for the advice and for also helping her study. She also mentions her grandfather has been talking very highly of him lately and wonders what he's done to deserve such praise. She then asks if he adores couples like her grandparents, to which he nervously answers, they're probably the ideal couple. While he heads to the bathroom, Mio thinks of how her grandpa keeps mentioning Shota's so great and wants him as his grandson. She knows he's already approved of Shota, and in the bathroom she's a nervous wreck, telling himself over and over. They're just having a study session, not a date at the Sito residence. Mino brought flyers to explain her school is having a cultural festival with her classroom, hosting a cafe, and is stoked to go to school with her husband. She couldn't bear going without it. We arrive at the Northtown High Festival, where Shouzou hasn't been since the last major typhoon back then. They couldn't even visit. The school grounds peacefully. Ine is really frolicking around like a kid until she gets surrounded by students trying to sell her thing. One student in particular accidentally spills juice on Ine, so they offered to prepare her a change of clothes in the sewing club, waiting for her to finish. Changing, Shilo thought back to how Ine mentioned she had gotten many interviews for marriage from the son of a lord's family to a coal mine company president. A lot of them talked to her father in high school. She loved music, having played the koto, shamisen, and piano. He wished he could have heard her play himself. Learning Ine was ready to be seen. He was surprised to see her in a school uniform eating lunch together. Wearing the uniform has strangely made Ine revert to her prim and proper form as a student from Tokyo. Shu even notices her eyes are the same way as they were back when she was young and pretentious. He decided he wanted to tease her a bit and asked if there was anyone she liked, and she coldly answered, no, she has no interest in men. Oh, this is bad. Is she going to be like this the whole day? However, Ine giggled, as this was all just act. But if she doesn't like anyone, maybe he has a chance at her. She knows 70 years ago, one man had the same idea when he approached her. Turns out, Shu was the one who got teased this time in Mino's class. The couple enjoyed their maid cafe, but they're having a bad time getting customers since Class 33 is having an authentic ramen shop with the help of a guardian. So customers are lining up there, even with the main cast being students. She'll finds the help of an adult to be unfair. While Mino alone is bringing a lot of boy customers, they need some way to bring in girl customers, and it looks like Shu is going to be the answer now. Class 32 is stealing all the customers with a lot of old. They're really enjoying Shu's handsome butler service. Here's your order. My lady, sure thing. My lady, the elderly women scream at Shu's performance as a CO2 couple. One look at Northtown's old photos. Ine mentions that if Shu had gone here, he'd be in the pictures as well, which embarrasses her as she doesn't want her husband to feel bad for not having attended high school. Shu thought back to when he asked his father to let him attend high school. However, his father had told them they didn't have much money and Shu was the eldest son. He needed only to grow apples like his predecessors. His father told him to give up and that he had no other choices. It was all in the past, however. Now Shu's glad he didn't have to go to school. After all, if he had gone, he never would have met Ine when these pictures were taken. It was probably the same time he had met her at the secluded shrine. Him not being in these pictures are proof that he was with her. However, he mentions their pictures are being taken now after the festivities. Shaw waited outside the cafe. Having wanted to invite Mino for the campfire, but with Ine still there, he found it difficult to approach. Mino mentions to her grandma that she really wants to go to the campfire, but has no dance partner and looks like Sho had been watching along with Shota figuring out the situation. Shu takes his wife away to give Shota the opportunity to ask Mino, and as the couple drives out, Sha and Mino dance the night away. The sands of time appear before Ine as she thinks about how she felt when wearing the school uniform. She knows she has to go back to her original face for the administration at Town Hall, so a simple spin of the hourglass should be enough. However, she trips, breaking a part of the hourglass handle, and in the morning the older Shouzou greets her, but notices Ine's hair is black for some reason. Looking at the TV, she weirdly calls it a strange board with a person in it, and that stove is a furnace that already has fire in it. How the fridge is so cold without ice in it. The calendar reads an unfamiliar era, several decades after her era. She doesn't know who Shouzou is referring to as grandma, but now wonders if he's referring to her in Sasaki. That's her name, with a couple sitting down together. Shu asks if Ine really doesn't know who he is after she replies. Yes, Shu picks up that her memories must have also turned young again too, especially with Ine referring to her last name as her maiden one, Sasaki. It seems her memory has regressed to the time period before the two of them had even met. Ine realizes, with the world being nearly a century later, she should have been panicking in the situation. However, with the wedding ring still on her finger, she feels what Shu's saying must have some validity. She's certain she must have been the one who proposed to him given her personality, but wonders, why did she fall for him and spend half a century in the world with him? Shouzou wasn't expecting what was to come next. She proposed he make her fall in love with him again, well before they begin all the memory. Processing, Shu believes it's a good idea for them to eat. First, however, Ine remarks the rice cooker to be a weird apparatus. She tries the rice and is blown away with it being nothing at all. Like the rice, she knows with a pretentious attitude, she simply tells Shu, I suppose it has a good flavor, but as Shu brings out all the leftovers for them to eat, Ine blankly stares, but is glad some customs of this future. Japan haven't changed at all, as they say. Itaki before beginning their meal after eating, the two begin cleaning up, but Shu wonders why she kept staring at him. It seems she's not used to seeing the master of the house doing housework. Shu responds that his father was the domineering sort. He was a good example of what Shu didn't want to become. Shu himself also wasn't very good at cooking, so oftentimes he left most of that to Ine, but he does most of everything else. Ine thought of that as commendable, but Shu didn't think of it as anything special. After all, she always did orchard work with him as well. Ine thought this era's way of life to be strange. But Shu responded, it's not like that at all. They've always been this way. They just didn't like things to be unbalanced, with a now understanding that this daily life has spanned several decades. She's surprised Shu's been doing housework the entire time, while not making a show of it or asking for thanks. She blushes from it, still looking away from him. So it's hard to see at night before they're about to go to bed. Sho tells her he'll use the hourglass to turn young again. Something Na doesn't quite understand until she sees his youthful, handsome form in the morning. She didn't see an hourglass in her dreams, but she was more fixated on if this guy was actually Shu. This does affirm, though, that this Ine is from a time before she had met Shu, as she doesn't recognize this form either. Most unfortunate for our guy. She found it all to be strange. She didn't have any memory of his voice or appearance. But why is it seeing him from behind looking sad that she wished he would share some of that pain with her? She clenched at her chest, wishing to share in his sadness so strongly, looking through their family. Albumena was surprised to see her son Yoshi's family, with Shu bragging about how great they were, and put on a false smile. She knows if they learned that she'd lost her memory, she's sure they'd be in shock. So of course they'd have the worst timing, with Mino shouting she's come to visit. Oh man, Shu forgot Yoshi's family was coming to visit today. Ine reacts to this, quickly saying she pretend to be like grandma. For today, however, Shu wonders how his wife will get past her memories and missing accent. But she tells him to figure out how to cover for her, even not knowing about her family. Ine knows she still has a personal duty as a mother, and her duty right now is to not make her children sad. The first thing Mino noticed was Ine's hair now being black. However, Ine put on her best acting skills, welcoming her in. She tries using a country accent with her son. But it isn't going too well, so Sho makes the excuse that with them having visited Mino's school festival. The other day, Ine, being reminded of her own school days, made her want to use her old accent. Mino found it strange as she was used to her grandmother always using polite grammar. But Mino still thought how Ine was speaking now to be new and cool with Mino talking at her, and Ni thought more about the granddaughter staring at her. Mino seemed like a girl who really cared about her grandparents. She wondered what this heartfelt feeling was inside of herself. She then suddenly grabbed on Twino and held her close, thinking. She was so cute and stared at an array of ingredients, surprised to learn they'd make a rice curry. She then began viciously chopping, prompting Yoshiaki to ask if everything was all. Sho assured him things were fine, and is now wondering if his wife had forgotten how to cook, too, only for Ine to respond her servants were the ones who usually cooked. This must mean her mind was brought back to before the farm life. Ine gets a little annoyed, thinking. Shu is mocking her in his heart for being hopeless at cooking, but he assures her that's not the case. He knows she's just trying to make their sons not worry. She then has him teach her, and with them cutting together, Ine feels that standing in the kitchen feels somewhat nostalgic. The leftovers she ate yesterday were apparently ones she had made previously, and they were delicious. She wonders what could have pushed her to become a good cook, but cutting together with him. She began to understand it had to be Shu's fault eating. The curry, Mino felt the potatoes were cut a little big. Today, however, Sho denied it, saying she was just imagining things. We turn back to Yoshiai's past, where his parents would often praise him for his hard work. Unfortunately, his boss right now didn't believe his hard work was enough. He needed to also produce results, with Mu knocked out in the evening. Sho was shocked to hear Yoshi's company may go out of business if they keep going under. Population declines are causing branch stores to fold as well. He's really expecting company to not last much longer. Shouzou offers for him to work at his apple farm if things really go under, but Yoshiaki declines, not wanting to trouble his parents. He plans on pushing himself further. He thinks he needs to work harder than he's ever worked. However, Ine responds by telling him he shouldn't work any harder than he already is. She believes there are people above him taking advantage of his hard work and kindness, and because of this, his situation will never change. Getting back on his feet is more than enough, so she assures him he can come to his parents anytime. With Yoshi's grievances aired out and himself now totally drunk, he asks Ine if she's really his mother and gasps, wondering if she's been caught, especially hearing him say she's like his mom, but also doesn't seem like it. He feels the air about her, and the look in her eyes is different, but she looks the same as when he was a kid. However, with her patting his head, it really did remind him of his childhood. Seems she was no match at fooling her own child. The next day, Shu takes Ine out to the shrine. She confessed to him at this doesn't help bring back any of her memories, but she wonders if reenacting the situation from back, then might the two sit together. And Ine learns she was the one who touched Sho's hand if he's lying. She won't hold herself responsible for this failing, but she wants to put in genuine effort in remembering reaching out for his hand. The two get totally nervous, and she finds this totally stupid that she did this before. She then scoots away feeling itchy all over at the hospital. They decide to visit Ine's older sister, Sudu, who used to let Ine sleep in her bed during the scary thunder in their childhood. She's much older now, though, and not too responsive, and found a flow of time to be cruel when she heard her sister was still alive. She came running, but she never imagined their mother was the only one that Pudu remembered. She felt the only one that her current self could turn to for comfort is no longer alive. She then turned over to Shu, noting he simply sat quietly by her side, not saying a word. She wondered if this was his way of saying she isn't alone. She felt there was no need for him to be so considerate of her feelings. Even if she was alone, she felt she'd be fine. But she felt she had to grab his shirt, and although this was supposed to be a serious moment, Shouzou felt like he wanted to use the restroom, but now would be bad timing. They then brought Sudu to a piano, because she was apparently incredibly good at playing, and her youth Sudo actually sits in front of the piano all the time, never touching the keys, just sitting there, and then sat beside her and began playing, remembering when Sudo had told her she'd match any song and wanted to play and kept playing. Knowing at this moment, Sudo didn't remember her or the place they grew up. However, Sue's eyes began to open and Ine was shocked to see her big sister playing right beside her and singing the song. Sudo still couldn't remember who Ine was, but she knows a good piano player when she hears it. This brought Ine and everyone to tears, seeing this beautiful moment at home, and was by herself for the night because Shu had to attend the Southtown Association meeting as she ate her dinner. She reflected on how it's been several weeks, yet her memory still hasn't returned at the moment. She saw no signs of falling in love with Shu, and also felt he hadn't proactively approached her in a romantic manner. Either being left alone and amnesic didn't make her feel any better about him. Also, the curry. He didn't taste so delicious either. Another mark against him. She wonders if he realizes she feels anxious about everything with him, not around even learning the basics of everyday life. Here she doesn't feel she should be so anxious. And yet she is. There isn't a need for Shu to return home so quickly. But she found herself wishing for it. Is it simply his presence by her side that has merit in and of itself, the memory of Shu telling her she is the one he'd never leave behind, suddenly restored her hourglass. She remembered confessing her feelings to him when she was 16. It was half in jest, but Shu had visited her at the shrine every day. The relatives she was staying with were on bad terms with his family, so she was forbidden from seeing him to see her again. He bowed and pleaded, and after seeing him again after all that time of separation, she was shocked to see a large bruise on his face. He had gotten from fighting with his father after that Ine fell seriously ill and collapsed. Sho took care of her, and her treatment fees lying in her hospital bed. She felt them being together was no good. She'd only bring him unhappiness. But to him it didn't matter how many unreasonable things came their way, he loved her with all his heart. He told her even if tens of thousands of unhappiness came raining down on them, he just needed to give her enough happiness to outnumber it all. And he swore to do it even if it meant devoting his whole life to it with them aging together. She knew Shouzou had kept his promise with Shu. Finally, returning home, Ine began running sick of herself for telling him to make her fall in love with him again with him. No matter how many times she'd lose her memories, it would always turn out the same. She teared up calling out to him as she jumped in his arms the next day. The couple sat at the same shrine within, asking how Shouzou was able to stay so calm through all this. He simply responded that Ine from back then and the Ine now are important to him. It didn't matter if she couldn't remember him with their fingers. Touching the two lovebirds were back in full form at the Saitou grandparents' household. The couple is planning their vacation to Tokyo. They're considering getting a sleeper train to play cards and drink alcohol in. However, Sheila bursts their bubble, telling them sleeper trains don't exist anymore. With the bullet train, they can now travel from their location to Tokyo in under 3 hours. However, the elderly couple thinks back to their old days when it used to take 8. Shay wonders if he should giving suggestions for their honeymoon trip. But Mino says it's fine since he's used to going to Tokyo for soccer club expeditions. The couple does have their eldest daughter and her family that live in Tokyo, but she's usually busy these days with work. Hu Xiaosou then says he'd love to have someone show them around the city, and everyone is looking towards Xiao Mino will tag along if he goes, and Ine loves the idea of their grandchildren coming with them during their honeymoon. Shada then tells them to wait a minute, he's not even their grandson. So this is when Shu whispers to him that if he comes along, he can go on a date with Mino. Of course, Shay tries to get permission from his grandfather, but with Hesk not liking Shu, he slams the idea on the ground. However, Mino appears introducing herself as Shot's classmate and Shu's granddaughter, who will be coming with them on the trip. She tells them she'd love for Shota to come with them because he'd be really helpful, and seeing Shota staring at her Hesk is excited. His grandson brought a bride home, and even though it embarrasses Shota, Hisk leaves him in their care shopping for the train travel. He buys some sweet potatoes from a longtime local store owner. However, the business hasn't been going so well, so Ine decided to eat outside, and with her beauty, she attracted the eyes of so many potential customers. As the shop then became flooded with business 60 years ago, an LMD station show said goodbye to another friend waving goodbye. He thought to himself he was always the one sending someone else off. He thought Tokyo just wasn't for him. But truthfully, he always wanted to go, so Ino woke him up from his daydream. He was just looking forward to their trip, as Yoshiaki says, goodbye to the kids. He's definitely more wary of Shota elsewhere. Shu admits he hadn't left the town of Almai since the day he was born. Ine felt bad thinking. All the time she'd been sick may have contributed to that. But Shu could never think badly of his lovely wife. As she took his hand to escort him inside, the kids stopped them, because that train leads to Hokkaido inside the bullet train. The elderly couple is surprised to see it go so fast as Shota and Mino enjoyed snacks. Mino commented on how they're not using their young faces today. So Shu answers it's because they have discounts for seniors smart. They don't want to be suspected for looking young. The two then take a quick nap and restore their youthful forms, return to Akimo, their daughter, who hears from Yoshiaki that their parents have become young again. She doesn't quite believe this, especially she remembering her mother's weak body. Unfortunately for Amy, though she got a cold the day her parents were visiting, she remembered at times like these. Her mother would always make porridge for her. Her mother was always kind, but when she stayed home with the cold, she was even kinder. Then the days spent together felt like heaven to her, with Ine arriving and holding her forehead. And my thought she was starting to see illusions of her mother from the past. But when Ine greeted her, Amy began panicking at the sight of her youthful mother. After a whole hour of explaining their situation, Ine apologized for visiting. Even though Am is sick, the elderly couple began chatting about their experiences here, and Shouzou remarked the vast difference in culture between here and the countryside. He can hardly believe this is still part of Japan. Akemi has quite a large family here, apparently with one daughter and two sons, while her son Shunke is still in high school. The other two siblings already have families. Then little Koz came to play, knowing his great-grandparents, for visiting and with them witnessing how similar Shu looked compared to his grandson Shinji. Koz mistake him for a doppelganger of his dad. The next day, Akemi's entire side of the family was informed of the situation, and while Mino and Shota went to Shinjuku, Shouzou and Ine went to Sugamo, happily enjoying all the shops for the elderly. The two actually split up for a bit to shop for their own things until Ine was surprised to find Sho posing for all the ladies. Their next stop was at the Milo Cafe and Restaurant, which Shu had reservations at. Ine and Mino glowed at the sight of a beautiful pair. And although Ino was a little concerned about the price, Shu told her not to mind it. Just this time, after a single bite, Ine quickly ate up the whole thing, a sight Shouzou really enjoyed. Then they went to a photo booth where the elderly couple posed far too formally. Mino decided she'd show them how to take pictures properly. So she and Shay came out with a nice set, making Sho really glad he came out to Tokyo with him. The Saitou couple then tried again, and despite Mino's tips, they could only come up with writing A on their photo sets back at Alm's place. Sho bought some tops as gifts for Koz. However, little Koz threw a tantrum, as this was not what he was looking for at all. So Shuk instead showed off the Boodle Beyblades, which were what Gi-Yus really wanted. Shu then challenged Koz to a battle where, if Koz won, Shu would buy him. His favorite toy Shunsuk wasn't confident in Sho's top winning out against a modern Beyblade. However, with Shu's immense rip force, he easily knocked his great-grandson's Beyblade out of the arena, with Koz crying in. Certainly wasn't too happy that night as Akam and Ine washed the dishes together. Akemi thought back to her brother Yoshiaki, telling her their mother had collapsed and was hospitalized again. Amy then admitted that she wondered when she had gotten married and moved away if Ine thought she had abandoned them. Amai always thought about how the rest of the family was doing. She always wondered if her mother was doing okay while being sick, but hated herself for never doing anything for them, with Amy crying in her mother's arms. Ine comforted her the same way she always had. She told Akemi she was fine as long as AI was, and even with them apart, they'd always be together with everyone gone. She already came to visit her grandparents' house, looking for a private place to study. With her entering in, she imagined remnants of her elderly grandparents, always greeting her and congratulating her on her exam scores. She only started to visit more because she wasn't so comfortable at home. She had some fears that one day her time with her grandparents would eventually come to an end. In a few years, she'll be an adult, have a family of her own, and no one would ever spoil her again, and by then maybe her dear grandparents wouldn't be around any longer. She knew she was always overthinking when she was alone, a terrible habit. But regardless, she wanted them to come back soon, which surprisingly Shouzou and Ine could feel telepathically. So they began their travels back, just kidding. They've made it to the city of Atami for their real vacation spot, with Shu and Ian crying their eyes out over the joy they're experiencing together. They're greeted at the Isumo Inn, where they settled down in their big guest rooms. Observing the open-air bath show continuously hints his wife to join in with him. However, Ine just ignores him offering to share the bath only with Mino instead, making Shu depressed. But with the kids out of the room, and hints to meet her there when the kids are asleep, so he sits in the cold bath for a long time. Even with Shota telling him he'll get sick, he's determined to keep himself cool for tonight. They sit at the dinner table, observing luxurious food, and for some reason, Shu is frozen with a weird look on his face when they eat the Saitou. Couple cries in joy boy before Ine pours Shu sake for the occasion. Sha starts feeling a little down. However, it's just that looking at the meal made him wonder if it really was all right for him to eat. He knows it's the Saitou couple's honeymoon, but feels bad that the men and women are sleeping in separate rooms. He blames himself as part of the cause. However, Mino tells him she's really glad he came. She felt like Shinjuku would have been scary if she had come alone. Even when strangers there tried to talk to her a few times, thanks to him, she was able to relax and enjoy herself. Even and thanks Shota for his guidance that night, Mino wished Shota good night. He was completely flush, however, as he never imagined he'd end up sleeping in the same room as her. It happened this way when Mino said it'd be weird for her grandma and grandpa not to sleep together for their honeymoon, and Ine responded the two would probably be fine as the two kids lay in their beds. Mino tells him to keep this a secret, because if her dad found out he'd killed them. They didn't talk about how Shouzou and Ine had been subtly flirting all the way here, and Mino wondered what would happen if her grandparents suddenly had another baby. She wanted Shay to call her grandma for a try. This certainly surprised him, but Mino really wanted to try feeling what her grandma feels to see what it's like, so with Shota's best impression. He says grandma is dinner, ready yet, which made Mino giggle because his impression was good, unlike mine. So they role-played back and forth like the couple who's been together for the last 70 years. Mino then wants to try calling each other by first names, since her grandparents also sometimes do that. Blushing red, Shota utters her name, something that certainly takes Mino A, so instead of saying his back, she nervously says it's time for bed in the Saitou couple's room. However, Shu had been knocked out for quite a bit and dizzy, a little annoyed since she spent all day trying to mentally prepare herself for the open. An air bath with him, but in his dreams he gets to be as pervy as he wants, only to accidentally flip his hourglass the next morning. Ino wakes him up since the couple was scheduled to visit the ocean. But she isn't so pleased to see him in his elderly form at the beach. En's beauty was like a snow-white canvas, all eyes on that beach were focused on a single point, but the people's gazes were stolen by the person behind her, because behind the transcendent beauty was the super-jacked elderly Shouzou sitting under a beach umbrella. Ian remarks she isn't fit for swimming and that collecting seashells is more than enough for her. Looking at Mino, Ine sheds a tear at how grown her granddaughter has become. However, in the water, Shu is making a scene, swimming intensely against Shota, defeating the young boy. Shu flexes on him as Shota still has a long way to go. While the kids play in the water, Shouzou couldn't help but feel En's swimsuit she bought is going to waste. Ine didn't mind relaxing in the shade though. Besides, on the inside, she knows she's an old lady over 80, but Shouzou is such a sweet guy. He thinks even in her elderly form, the bikini would suit her, and seeing all the other couples on the beach, he gets depressed, wanting to show off his beautiful lady. Ine thinks back to all the time she was bedridden. Back then, going seaside with her family and relaxing on the beach was nothing more than a pipe dream. Being like this right now, just the two of them together, makes her happier than she's ever been. She goes to wash off the sand on her legs, and in the shower, she thinks there's no way she could show her body off like this. It'd be too embarrassing back at the beach. even with Shouzou begging her to show off her swimsuit and just couldn't do it. She reminds him he's seen her naked countless times already. But this is different. I'm not going to explain it, Ine then adds she doesn't want any men other than him to see it. Anyways, by the dock, Mino seems a little down, but Vaughn explained herself to Shota, with Shota now helping put away the beach stuff. Mino stares at some wedding traditions that make her even more aware of her feelings for Shota. Back at the inn, Shota and Mino are a little disappointed that they can only seem to rally for 20 hits. Mino then offers her grandparents a try and they astonish a whole crowd, rallying at a breakneck pace for over 10 minutes at ping pong and even beyond. Then how long could they possibly keep going at night? Though they finally made it to the open air bath together, In is totally relaxed, but Shu is a little nervous, especially being in his geezer form. They then reminisced on the day they first turned young again, and Shu had asked her out on another honeymoon. Ine was sure glad they lived long lives together. It embarrassed her to imagine them as an elderly couple, trembling as they flirted in a bath and knowing their sands of time would eventually come to an end. Shu desired to be with his wife as much as possible. So the next day at the shrine near the inn, Shu was nervously picking out Emma tablets to write his wish on, but fled with his wife finding him. Then the kids had their turn to write their wishes. Shota wished to play in the National Soccer League, but when turning to Mino, she frantically tells him she didn't wish for anything important and shows him. Her wish was to get good grades on her tests since she's pretty bad at studies. However, on the side that's facing her, she really wrote, "I hope I can come back to Atami with the person I like observing shoes." Wish In reads his wish for the safety and health of his family. But she felt there had to be more to this and froze seeing what was written on the other side. Mino, that was Dayton, suddenly showed up to ask what was wrong. However, In denied anything, but looking at it over by herself again and read his true wish Shu had written. "I hope that in my next life I can be Grandma's husband again." They then make their way to a magnificent kusani tree nearby. That's been around for over 2,000 years. Legend has it that for every time you circle this holy tree, your life grows longer by 1 year. So now the Saitou couple is fired up for 100 laps. Mino then intensely stares at Shota as she wants her wish granted with a few laps around as well as they walked. He hoped the next time they walked around it together, that he'd be her special someone, not just a friend. Their hands then accidentally touched, making their hearts beat rapidly, and looks like the Saitou couple was close behind them and shakily praying for great-grandchildren, and Shu losing his mind, hoping Shota would go for it. Later that night they prayed at the tree. Mino heard Shota's wish of coming back to their hometown. After he was done playing professional soccer, after he passed out, Mose thought of him as really impressive. She never imagined him to have thought about his future so seriously, especially because she hadn't thought of hers at all. She thought back to her grandparents and was even somewhat jealous of them. She then walked towards Shay, apologizing for only leaving one kiss on his forehead. While he slept, we turned back to a younger Shu, pissed that his dead father had left their family in so much debt. He was so upset he'd have to pay it all back. He apologized to En, as he had no choice but to put off their honeymoon for the time being, with her being a loving wife. She accepted with ease, certain they'd find a way to get through this somehow. So he promised he'd take her on a honeymoon one day, they'd get her illness healed, and he'd work to make them tons of money. But in the end, they couldn't save up the money until their children were already grown and her illness never did get cured. It took a long time, but Shu finally succeeded in keeping his promise. Within reaching to hold his hand under the jacket, she thanked Shu from the bottom of her heart, making the kids jealous, wishing they could hold hands too. But another sweet episode. Find out what happens next by subscribing to my channel. Also, watch this next video. Our episode begins with the boy Takahashi in the library, looking for something he dropped. Then a girl, Shiori, comes over and gives him his library card, telling him she found it under the table. She then notices he is holding a book about legends of becoming young again. We then see the two of them sitting together, and he asks her if she is also studying medicine like him. He is in his second year of medical studies, and his name is Satoshi Takahashi. Shiori speaks to herself, realizing that he is a senior in the studies she wants to pursue. She then points to the book he is holding, and he tells her it is about legends of becoming young again. Since ancient times, there have been stories in this region about old people becoming young again, and it seems this has been happening every few hundred years. He is researching this. Then he asks her if she wants to study medical science to become a doctor like her father. She tells him it is not exactly like that, but her grandparents were the kind of people who never cared about their own suffering and always wished happiness for others. They saved her multiple times in her life, so she wants to become a doctor to save them just as they saved her when she was little. However, she won't tell them that because it is extremely embarrassing. Then we notice the grandfather standing behind the bookshelf, listening to the children's conversation and crying tears of joy. The scene then transitions to Shiori returning to her grandparents, who embrace her tightly. Shiori is surprised by their actions and doesn't understand why they're crying. The scene then shifts to the grandparents at home with Yoshiaki, who angrily tells them that his daughter Mino has been coming home late recently and has been acting very strangely. When he asks her about the reason for her lateness, she avoids answering, so he is sure she is hiding something from him. The grandparents realize that this is due to the boy Shota. Yoshiaki wonders if she has joined a suspicious group or met a bad boy, which is causing her strange behavior. He cries out in fear, saying that his daughter Mino is no longer the daughter he has known all along. The grandmother tries to calm him down, telling him that his daughter hasn't changed at all. Yoshiaki refuses to accept this and says that today's youth are not like those of the past. The internet now allows young people to do anything easily. He guesses that Mino might have created a secret account to engage in that dark society. The grandmother tells him to calm down again, assuring him that Mino's generation knows how to handle things well and that she is sure Mino will be fine. She also reminds him that he was very mischievous when he was Mino's age. The scene then shifts to Annie and Shouzou working in the garden. Two young children approach them and ask about the elderly grandparents who used to work there. Annie and Shouzou are very surprised and tell the children that the grandparents are very tired lately, so they are working in their... The children thank them for reassuring them about the grandparents and leave. Annie then tells Shouzou that she wants to ease the minds of those children. We then see the grandmother standing in front of an hourglass. The scene transitions to the next morning, where we see the elderly grandparents in the garden. When the children pass by as usual, they see the grandparents and are very happy. They ask about their well-being and are reassured before leaving. The scene then shifts to Mino as she leaves the house, bidding farewell to her grandmother. The grandmother enters the house and notices Mino's lunchbox on the table. The scene then cuts to Mino on the bus, looking into her bag and realizing something. Her friend asks her what's wrong, and Mino explains that she forgot her lunch at home. She doesn't want to buy anything from the school store because her grandmother had prepared the lunch for her, which doesn't happen often, only once every few months. The scene returns to the grandmother as she prepares to go to Mino's school to deliver her lunch. We then see Mino sitting on the bus, feeling sad because she forgot her lunch. She knows her grandmother worked hard and woke up early to prepare it for her. Suddenly, she looks back and sees her grandmother riding a motorcycle next to the bus. Her grandmother tells Mino to get off at the next stop so she can give her the lunch. The scene then transitions to Takahashi and Shiori studying together and talking. Takahashi mentions that he got his way of speaking from his grandmother. Shiori, in her thoughts, wonders why she has become so interested in Takahashi. She recalls a conversation with Mino, where Mino asked if there was someone Shiori liked, to which Shiori refused to talk about it. Returning to the present, Takahashi asks if she is okay. She replies that she is fine and was just wondering why he is researching people who have become young again. Takahashi then tells her he will explain and takes out his phone, showing her a picture of his grandparents as elderly people. He tells her that they became young again. The scene shifts to Shiori and Takahashi sitting with his grandparents. The grandmother tells them that one day they found a golden apple in the garden, and after eating it, they became young again the next day. Shiori is shocked by this revelation. Takahashi then asks his grandparents about their well-being and health. His grandfather inquires about his studies, and Takahashi explains that he is working hard because he wants to make them proud. After his parents' divorce, his grandparents became like his parents, and he wants to repay their kindness. Shiori thinks to herself that Takahashi is researching people who became young again, for the sake of his beloved family, which is the same reason she is trying to get into medical studies. She then tells them that there are two people she wants them to meet. Her own. The scene transitions to a meeting between the grandparents. Everyone is astonished to discover that others have also become young again. They sit together, drink, and have lively conversations, bonding over their shared experiences. Meanwhile, Shiori and Takahashi talk about their grandparents, and Shiori wonders aloud if she and Takahashi will become as entertaining as their grandparents when they are old. She then looks at Takahashi, gets flustered, and quickly clarifies that she didn't mean it that way, saying it was just an example. Later, the grandmothers, Setsuko and Ani, sit together and chat. Setsuko recounts her first meeting with Hajime. She explains that when she was working and living in an inn, some men tried to bother her, forcing her to dance and harassing her. Suddenly, Hajime appeared and rescued her, and they eventually got married. She declares that her husband is the best man in the world. Annie then asserts that her husband is the... This leads to a playful rivalry, with each grandmother convinced that her husband is the best. They decide to have their husbands compete to determine who is truly the best. Then the scene shifts to the grandparents outside, and Annie tells them that they will hold a 3-round competition. The scene then transitions to Noshonosuke arriving at the grandparents while they're competing against each other. Annie asks Matsunosuke to be the judge, and he announces that the first round is a beloved wife tug-of-war. The first to reach the point where his wife stands will win. The challenge begins, and each husband tries to reach his wife. After many attempts, Shouzou reaches his wife Annie and grabs her hand. But it turns out that Annie had moved out of the circle, causing their loss and the other's victory. Next, we move on to the second round of the competition, which is a tasting challenge. They must taste the 2 dishes in front of them and choose the one prepared by their wife. They begin eating, and we see Grandpa Hajime talking to himself because he can't tell the difference between the dishes. He wonders if they use the same spices in both dishes. Then we see Shouzou tasting the food and realizing that both dishes were prepared by his wife. He informs them of this and they win. Then we move on to the third round, and we see the grandmothers discussing the topic of the third round. Matsunosuke asks them what the purpose of this competition is. He wonders if the winning husband will become the best husband. Annie tells him that they wanted to know who among their husbands would win because the winner would become the best husband. Matsunosuke becomes very angry and tells them that each woman loves her husband, and there is no winner when comparing one love to another. He adds that if they don't consider the other person's feelings, how can they call it love? Suddenly, Matsunosuke's wife appears and tells him, "I love you very much, my husband." Then we see everyone eating and enjoying their time. The scene then transitions to Shiori and Grandma Annie in the kitchen, where Shiori asks Annie to teach her how to cook. Shiori decides to make chicken courage, and Grandma Annie asks her what the purpose is. Shiori explains that she will be spending the entire day studying at the library on the weekend, so she wanted to prepare food. The scene shifts to Shiori with her friend at the library as he eats the food she prepared and tells her that it is very delicious. And so, our episode ends today. To watch the upcoming episodes of this anime, please subscribe to the channel and activate the notification bell. The episode begins with the couple watched a horror movie starring the terrifying Dis, a horror character that became extremely popular among their granddaughter Mino's generation. Shu admitted that the special effects nowadays are great, but at the same time, he thought it was an exaggeration for people to scream. Just because there's a ghost coming out of the TV when he asked I'm for her opinion on the matter. She was praying with a Jun hand, a kind of Japanese rosary, putting coarse salt near the TV and covering it with a sheet when it came time to sleep. The old man was in another dimension within his own sleep, while his wife couldn't close her eyes, seeing evil faces in the wooden ceiling. Suddenly, she rose from the bed with strangely red eyes in an intense glow until she lay back on her husband's chest and resumed praying. The next day, Minao asked her grandparents what they were doing near a small tree, and they told her that Takahashi had passed by and gave them a young apple tree seedling. However, planting a new apple tree now is complicated because it will be a lot of work, but they didn't want to throw it away. Thinking about it, Mino remembered a conversation she had with Sha about a dream she wanted to fulfill after graduating from high school. So she asked her grandparents to give her that seedling. Since her birthday is next week, Shouzou emphasized that apple trees need to be taken care of very well and they can live as long as a human. But the girl promised she would handle everything, even though she knew it would be a big challenge. Believed that having a tree growing with her sounded beautiful lately. She's been thinking a lot about the future and she imagines that having a farm could be really cool. But for her to properly take care of everything involved in this dream, she needs to learn as soon as possible how to take care of things like that seedling. For example, with that the elderly couple is proud of their granddaughter, who continues to confess that she's not sure about having a farm or not. However, seeing someone she admires pursuing their goals, while she's not made her feel like she needs to shake off the dust and go after what she wants. Speaking of that person, Mino calls Shay to do something tomorrow morning. A day later, the boy helps the girl plant the seedling and she likes to think about the idea of the apple tree living until they become grandparents. When that day comes, the children won't be there anymore, not even the ones from elementary school. Maybe no one else will be living in that area, and that generates a feeling of loneliness in Mino. To remember, she recalls that her grandparents planted an apple tree to celebrate their wedding. And this thought brings a strange sensation to her. Shota points out that he doesn't know what tomorrow will bring, but he asks her to come to the orchard when he's an adult. That is if Mino isn't married and living somewhere else. However, Mino asserts that she will wait for him. Not just once, but she confirms again when the boy pretends not to understand, spying on the conversation. Shouzou and are moved by the sea and decide to make red rice for dinner tonight. A few years ago, the couple planned to have a Yomiya, a traditional summer festival for the local deity, just as they did in the past, because undoubtedly the deity would love to come to their world and drink with the people. Soon the shrine was all set up to receive the event, and Mino was trying on a beautiful yukata that her grandmother lent her. In fact, it tells that this outfit belonged to her daughter Akimi, because the old lady has always been satisfied with her traditional outfits. Frustrated, Mino believes that the dress would look great on her grandmother, so she feels uncomfortable with something behind it to solve the problem. The girl grabs her phone and calls her mother to talk about these yukatas she has in the closet. Shortly after, Shouzou arrived home and saw his wife wearing one of those clothes and was amazed at night in some corner of the event. The cats fed on the raw fish thrown away next to the stalls, while the children played and the adults drank in communion. Shouzou was already a little altered, but his friend poured another round of drinks into the man's glass. Reflecting on this relationship between her husband and the neighbors, likes to think that this bond is very important. And speaking of that, it's likely that she'll stay up until late drinking with the buddies while she stays out. According to her, it's good to endure certain things and leave one's own happiness for later. That's the definition of a good life. Something she should have accepted a long time ago, even though she's old on the inside. A restlessness of young people hits the woman's body, making her focus on not expressing it on her face. Suddenly, Shouzou appears in front of I'm visibly altered, but the world of the woman regains its glow upon noticing the presence of the one she loves. Meanwhile, the people who stayed drinking lament the departure of the friend because they wanted to know more about the story of becoming young again. However, one of them asks what they prefer. After all, alcoholic drinks, tears, or women without hesitation. The others respond that they only worship the drink that exists within them. So the bald old man observes that's why all the young people aren't with them, walking among the crowd. Stares at a couple sharing 2 sweet strawberries. So her husband asks if she wants one, but she refuses, reflecting on the woman's response. The man considers that her attitude has a lot to do with the lifestyle imposed on everyone in the show of period, as if it were a crime to wish for something, as if we should only live to work. So he insists on offering a strawberry to his beloved, who continues to refuse. He goes further and reminds her that she loves this fruit, and since they just ate yakaisoba, a sweet treat would be very nice, and gradually gives in and starts to like the idea, but still thinks that paying 500 yen for a strawberry is a bit too much, because it's the price of a full meal. That said, despite the speech, Shuo ends up convincing the woman to accept the sight. Meanwhile, the man had no idea that this humble strawberry would open the gates of hell when it orders all the already takoyakis at a stall. Later, she scores a headshot on a stuffed bear of his shooting booth, eager to grab the creature that reminds her. So much of her husband, however, the saw owner knows very well that a gun like that one doesn't have the firepower to take down the bigger prizes, and hitting the target isn't enough. It's necessary to knock it down. Since he surgically adjusted the pressure to weaken it, the only way to knock down the prize would be by shooting several times rapidly on the other side of the counter. Shouzou claims he's the man and assures he'll cover his wife in the shootout errand with corks between his fingers. The young elder and his wife face the target with a determined expression until they both shoot simultaneously at the bear, leaving it staggering. After that, they reload the gun and pull the trigger simultaneously, once again hitting the poor bear, which falls lifeless on the shelf. In the face of this unprecedented achievement, the couple was observed by the people around with a mix of terror and admiration. While Shuo, a former member of the hunting club, invites his wife to sit somewhere and take a break from being champions in the next scene. In a dream, illustrates in her mind the philosophy that when two people love each other, one dies first and leaves the other behind. The one who stays feels overwhelming loneliness for the rest of their life, fulfilling the inevitable destiny of a love that was almost forever. In this dream, and discovers that these visions were a warning of how close she was to kicking the bucket, and she's amazed to learn how many days she has left upon waking up from the nap next to Shouzou. She already imagines that she won't have the same amount of sand in the hard blast as her husband either way. She concludes that reality is cruel. You asked if heard any voices in her dream, because he himself heard one too. He was warned that he'll last the year, but his wife doesn't need to reveal how much time she has left if she doesn't want to. With that said, and gets closer to her husband and reveals that she has a week left to live. While Shouzou wraps his arm around her, she shares that she felt death approaching for over a month, despite being sickly. For as long as she can remember, she feels privileged to have lived for so long. On the other hand, even though old in experience, nothing could prepare Shouzou for this moment. Although he thought it could, miracles contain a dose of suffering. The flow time is always cruel in an act of desperation. Shouzou begs the heavens not to take away the love of his life from him. At that moment, a balance descends upon the earth and envelops the couple, while Mino notices a glow in the sanctuary. Shiru is sucked into the hard glass dream with his wife sleeping in his arms. A voice that can seen introduces itself as Takami, the deity of this sanctuary. She promises to lend her power to fulfill the man's wish as gratitude for him and his wife having cleaned this sacred place that had long been abandoned. If it weren't for A and Shouzou, the deity would have already disappeared. However, she is just a small Tagami from a remote rural town, unable to create life from void and extend the duration of a human being on Earth. So Shouzou wants more days with his wife. He must reduce another person's lifespan without a second thought. The man takes half of his sand and gives it to her. Then she wakes up, not knowing how long she slept, and Shouzou says it was just about 15 minutes, as if nothing had happened, and reveals that she dreamed her hourglass gained sand out of nowhere. And after that, she stopped hearing that strange voice. Returning to the previous topic, Shu recalls that his wife mentioned having few days left, and she adds that it's better this way because that way, they don't have to count how much life they have left for each other to seal this agreement. They intertwine their pinky fingers, while Shouzou reflects that I will kill him if she finds out what he did anyway. It will be worth it because then neither of them will have to go after the other. When the time comes, it will leave together. With that in mind, the elderly man contemplates the fireworks to capture as many beautiful scenes as he can. Meanwhile, Satoshi tells Shiori with a know-all air that a long time ago near the sanctuary, there lived a very happy couple in a certain year. A drought caused hunger and diseases that killed the people of the village one by one. This couple gave water, which was the most important thing in that context, to the sacred tree, but their wish was not granted, and they also died a few days later. Golden fruits sprouted from that tree, which cured diseases and satisfied the hunger of those condemned by the drought. According to legend, the wishing power of that couple still flows through this land to this day. Even in modern times, impatient with the story, she turns her back and runs while reflecting on how strange she has been feeling about wanting to be like her grandparents. Satoshi catches up with the girl with 2 chocolate bananas as an apology, and she accepts, lowering her tone a bit a week later, and realized she's still alive and starts crying because she was so scared. Despite accepting death, she couldn't bear to think of her husband alone. Faced with this, Shouzou hugs his wife and asserts that they need to live life as they always have, even if the day they both depart is tomorrow. Hey folks, if you're digging this anime and want to see more, drop a like down below and don't forget to subscribe to the channel. The episode begins with Mino talks about Halloween. After all, there was nothing missing for it to arrive, and what better idea than to dress up to celebrate it. And although the grandparents didn't like this very much, they still decided to do it for the love of their granddaughter, who on the night of October 31, she appeared wearing a cute witch dress, while Shuta was wearing a brown bear cosplay for the occasion. And when she went to look for the grandparents to see what kind of costumes they decided to wear, we see that they went too far into the paper, dressed as both ancient demon and living mummy for the Day of the Dead. So much that Mino could not handle so much acting and ended up fainting. After seeing her grandparents and turn in the distance, we see a car on the road that seemed to look for the truck that used to appear on the route, which has a ghostly speed, and 2 young people practically wanted to know if it really existed. And when they came across a truck, they knew that it was not the one they were looking for. So they just overtook the grandfather and made the worst mistake of their lives, throwing a cigarette butt in their apple orchard, something that would be unforgivable for him. While at his grandparents' house, Yori was visiting and talking to his grandmother about why his grandfather is not usually at home. To which Ina responds that it was normal, since her husband must patrol the apple orchard after all. Since he is so big, there is never a lack of someone who enters and takes his fruits to sell them without permission. In addition to this, the grandmother revealed that since the grandfather began to patrol, Kremen dropped significantly in the area, even ensuring that her husband, when it comes to protecting the apple orchard, seems to become someone. So when the rude people who insulted the grandfather's apple orchard saw behind them how a truck began to follow them at full speed, they quickly knew that the truck of legends was about to finish them off, and no matter how much they accelerated or maneuvered, they knew that their car with modifications must have left the old truck behind a while ago, and that it is hot on their heels. It made the slightest sense, although this last one has a small explanation that we will see in the form of a memory, starting because an old friend of his not only had a workshop to repair vehicles, but also because of his friendship. He gave him many modifications, of course focused on his friend. He could carry many more boxes of apples without so many problems. Yet the engine of Sue's truck ended up being a mystery to his grandfather, since his friend did not want to tell him what extra gift he had given him. But by the time his grandfather continued his chase, and he noticed that the car he was chasing could not take the curve in the apple orchard. So he took the opportunity to overtake them in order to overtake them and show who was in charge in the area. This was more than enough for the strangers, who would no longer return for fear of encountering the demonic truck again. The fear was so great that the next day they appeared on the news crying so that people would no longer approach the area after all. A ghostly truck drove into the night, which, although it scared the grandmother a little, she knew that it was him who was mentioned, so he just decided to ignore the whole topic. A little later we see Matsu, who was on his personal land, to hunt animals, explaining that he would teach us how to use a compressed air gun, so we could get rid of Germans from the home. More specifically, I would practice aiming with cans and other very important things when hunting, such as, if we wound an animal with a shot and we did not want to end its life quickly, we could end up having a serious problem with the police. And although this was very interesting to learn, all the grandmothers had not heard a single word, because they were all behind him so that he himself could teach them how to shoot the gun. Because he was very handsome, and he is also a good teacher, which made Matsu take very clear. Aside, so when all the old ladies were taught by him, they wanted to try their aim together, which was incredibly accurate. Something that surprised the grandfather, so he began to encourage them more. This being the only reason why the grandmothers tried so hard to practice. But Matsute's friend asked him to calm down, because in part he knew that he would need to improve with his weapons, because lately they were very stressed by all the damage that the field animals have done to their gardens, and this would be a great relief for them, although perhaps in the end, An elite battalion ended up being formed. Because of some time later, we see a heavy rain in which Mino was trapped along with Shuta without an umbrella. But since they were close to the temple, they were able to take refuge under it to dry off and avoid getting sick as much as possible. Possible, but for me, not. The saddest thing is that he couldn't go to his grandfather's house if this continued, and he also felt a little bad since his friend had lent him his coat. So he wouldn't be cold but Shuta like a good gentleman. What as he stated that it didn't matter, and calmed her down a little so that she would keep it. Although when a strong lightning struck so close to them, to the point that by instinct, he hugged Mino, and she also hugged him since she had been very scared. But this also made them both. They turned red from the hug and Mino to try to calm the situation, assured that he would soon call his grandfather to pick them up. But unfortunately, for him he had no signal at all because of the area. Although Shuta was impressed by something else, which Mino could also see. And it was a shadow or a hologram or a spirit. God knows about his grandmother with his grandfather, but from the past, where the grandfather precisely gave his wife something to cover up on that cold day, something that left Mino and those from a distance speechless. Grandparents seemed to remember moments with this rain, which was exactly the same as one from the past, where they were both in the temple, and this same scene was seen by both young people who, although they wanted to talk to the ghosts, they simply could not hear them, but the little ones anyway. They knew that they were the grandparents, and when the ghost of Ine began to speak, this account tells how she was depressed about her family since they had prohibited her from getting together with the Saitou that is practically Sei's family, and if she ignored it, she would inherit it completely. Even Sus's ghost had similar problems since his father that day had brought him who he wanted to be his future fiancé. So perhaps this day, due to everything that was happening, should be the last of both of them. Together, if so, I knew that he had to act by pushing Ciso to the ground, since his plan was very clear. If Ciso's family found out that he was with another girl, they simply couldn't continue with the engagement, ensuring that the first to act is the one who always wins. And even though Grandpa, well, he was decent, and he didn't want to be filthy in a sacred temple, this didn't matter 3 radishes to his wife, who went straight to action. Although this being something so explicit, Mino had to cover Shuta's eyes until he got to his grandparents' house, where Rin was waiting for them with a hot bath upstairs and lots of towels, so they wouldn't catch a cold from being outside for so long. But before going to take the bath, Mino wanted to ask his grandmother something specifically. If a long time ago, they used to go a lot to the sanctuary that was near her home, and since her grandmother only said yes, this gave Mino the answer she wanted. But while they were going up, Ine knew that they had discovered her, and she scolded her grandfather for telling his dirty tricks. Although he assured that he would never tell something like that, and by the time both little ones took their bath and dried themselves properly, we see that Shuta was very, very angry. After all, he had seen something very dirty with his friend, and this made him feel strange. But anyway, he couldn't stop thinking about the phrase, "He who always acts first wins." And although Shuta thought about doing something so aggressive with Mino, he knew that it was a bad idea since he would only end up being scared of Mino. He quickly knew that maybe I didn't end up so scared, and for Mino's part, he remembered when he was washing the dishes with his grandmother, and she told him to how envious she was of those her age since dressing. How you want and loving whoever you choose was not something that Ine had in her youth. After all, she and her husband had to face their entire family to be together, even though they were together. Hayo even had to come to blows with his father over her. So his grandmother's advice was only to do whatever he wanted now that he is young, as long as he has the courage to take it. For this reason, Mino asked Shuta. If anything, when the lightning struck, he had hugged her out of fear or to protect her. And although with great shame, the young man assured her that it was like that, but he was also sure that it was out of fear. We see that this was more than enough for Mino to know that he was very kind, so that just like his grandmother put her head on Young to finally declare herself, but just at that moment, Mino's 6th instinct was activated, and he went outside to meet his grandparents, trying to Usmar a little, so unfortunately Shuta would have to wait a little longer to have a special moment. And now we go to see a couple of days later where Ine accidentally fell asleep on the train. But still, the kind train worker took the trouble to wake her up and even take her things to help her, and although Ine did not want to cause her inconvenience. The man assured that she was fine. After all, she was the only one who was on the train, something that caused the man some sadness since, in the past, the carriage was used a lot, but nowadays everyone preferred to go to the car because of what it was like a little bleak. And although if there was a special reason for taking the train, and the old women mentioned that a friend, his own, had invited them for a walk, although in the end it was Ine who had invited them, and with his young way, he assured the worker that this town still needs his services, something that could only make the man happy while Ine was going through a nice trip. Good morning later. The snow began to arrive in town, and for the grandparents this meant driving more carefully. But when they noticed a long line of cars, they quickly knew that they would lose a lot of time, and most likely the first car from the man in the front row couldn't see anything and was afraid of crashing. But he also knew that he was making a nuisance for other people. And before the nerves began, the grandfather came to the rescue with his truck to guide the poor man. After all, who better than him, who spent more than 60 years in the town, to be the savior of the winter road, although this ended up filling the road with snow. And so all's well that ends with a price to pay the next day. The snow was so much that Ine wanted to clear it before her husband arrived, but her new body was not like the one she had before. It simply began to get cold almost without having to do anything. And on the other hand, her young version did not stop sweating. So she needed to take off more and more clothes to the point where, when her husband arrived, he found a sweaty woman with which turned him into a small living stove and nothing. That's all. If you liked it, subscribe to support the channel. Good. The episode begins a few days before the new year. We visit them and learn that this is the ideal date for grandparents because the family usually gathers at home, and because of the work involved, their son Yoshiaki chose to assist them, albeit at their peril. The 6-year-old son soon started to lag behind him in terms of age, eventually became weary. Yoshiaki, who knew that with every extra year, would eventually join the old people's club. His father assured him without delay. It was evident that his strength had decreased, leaving one to be impressed. Yoshiaki had to witness his father, in spite of his advanced age, leaving him in a bad way in front of his beloved, who was handling the dough 1,000 times better than him, because of the effort that his parents always made on these dates in a short amount of time. Later, outside the house, we witness Mino admiring his grandfather's snowman. Though he remained silent deep down, he enjoyed being flattered by his granddaughter. When Ine arrived the following day, she struck up a conversation with her daughter-in-law about how common it was to see people doing fun activities like obstacle courses or model trains on television with his grandchildren, with his astonishing hyper-realistic snowman, such as the bear wearing a sash that he had won a long time ago. Uiso was at an even higher level. He asked Mino to tell his distant grandson which character he liked, and the granddaughter pointed out the challenging one to him. Thus, he came up with an idea when Krux, who was visiting with his family, saw the nearly absurd creations that went beyond human limits. Evidently tired, the grandparents chose to take a quick nap. Even as he slept, the grandfather was planning the next doll he would make when he woke up. Sadly, her sister was too old not to recognize Ine when she went to greet her. Kusei invited Takehiro and his daughter Shiori to join him in a card game as they were playing. Shiori was more concerned about Tsuru's grandmother. Tsuru remained silent, and the young lady was well aware that she was not likely to respond. Shiori was already accustomed to having her around, and knew that she had been in that state for as long as she could remember. But when she saw the card game, her grandmother started to recall the days when it had always prevailed. As Shiori started reading the first riddle, Tsuru had just settled down to play with her grandchildren. Grandmother quickly accepted the winning card. He kept calling his mother, recalling those wonderful times, even though she was at least as experienced as she was in this kind of game. When the grandchildren revealed what Tsuru had done to Ine a short while later, she wasn't very convinced. It was time for a delectable meal, and as his grandchildren were consuming their food, the small kiosk started massaging his grandfather. The father of the little one recalled that they never massaged him. The young one was certain that he wouldn't give him one, even when his brother asked him to. He asked her to give him a massage, and she agreed to do so while he massaged Mino as well. Shiori started to have doubts about the little one due to his sinister intentions. Shiori's eyes brightened when Sue gave him some cash as a New Year's gift. He wanted some too, but Sue stopped his bad luck. His 500 gift consisted of a book voucher, which is far less than what they offered. He was attacked by Shiori's sadness, but the adults assumed that they were just extremely tired. In actuality, he had good reason to be upset because the other grandchildren gave them more yen. We hurried over to watch the grandchildren playing a game called a Rosa Level 3, while the older ones pretended there was none. The women talked like Shiori Kairu's mother did the following day, discussing how her granddaughter had grown to love her. Studying, however, had a detrimental impact on their relationship, because Ori gradually stopped. Speaking with her and Nelly confirmed that exam periods are the best times to show your kids the most affection. Not to mention how he helped Takahiro with his... He told Kaoru that even though Shiori didn't talk to him during the entrance exams in the past, he knew that they were doing it for his benefit and that he shouldn't be depressed. These were the exact words Yoshiaki's wife needed, which is why Kuro nearly started crying when she heard them. She used the occasion to share that she had a difficult patient at work who was disrespectful and always gave bad orders. She only asked Ine for advice, and they advised her to consider reasonable requests. And the rest should be disregarded by her. She was nobody's servant there, after all. Katie's remarks that In's assertion that mothers are resilient but not pain immune were accurate were also touched by these words. All of the women were located while Ishu searched for a replacement starter for the serve. The other granddaughters weren't really aware of what was going on, so they were hugging in. We now see some Christmas notes, too many to count. 400 to be exact. The reason behind so many notes is that, for the grandparents, this was their updated take on the social media act. Something more sentimental and thoughtful to send when theirs arrived. The grandparents started to notice that Shoki had written something to his grandfather. A member of the Sugo fan club wished him a happy Christmas and expressed the hope that they would have more time together. The second one was more intimate, as Shuta's grandfather sent them Christmas greetings, ensuring they would soon own the great-grandson. Additionally, the grandparents stated that they were unable to open as many notes as they would have liked this year. Some were simply before and after pictures with a note wishing them a happy new year and stating that they were refreshed. Nevertheless, there were calls coming in after hours, and the phone was ringing. It was time to head back home, which meant saying goodbye to some. Kusuk was unwilling to go. To help him relax, all he wanted was to be with his grandparents. He was invited to play with his father by his sister. He did, after all, resemble Grandpa Sue too much. However, this was insufficient for the young child. He received the teddy bear with a sash from Grandma. Ever since, he would never forget them. The little boy was allowed to go back home with his family after making a small promise. When the next day came, Sue couldn't help but cry a little because the grandparents had seen him in the distance. Kashuda and Mino would be visiting the apple orchard that day. Sue appeared to be more composed. While Ishu was teaching Shuda which branches to cut, the grandparents quickly had breakfast in order to go straight to their granddaughter and friend. The young people's rapid rate of learning and a shift in topic impressed him. In a flash, the grandfather inquired about his granddaughter's well-being. Shuda just said, shy, which is fine, but Siso needed more than that. Ultimately, Grandpa was stopped by Shuda's grandfather. Shuton knew it was too early to inquire about the wedding's date every time he got the chance, but Sei would always be watching the young man. Even though Mino thanked her grandmother for allowing her to visit, knowing that the main reason was to spend time with Shoda and have an excuse to invite him to the apple orchard, the grandmother still accepted her request. We see that Shudapa called her by mistake in front of her grandparents. Even though Mine did not want to convince him that her grandmother was lying, Sayudeje left her some supplies so that she wouldn't go without anything that day, but not before telling him that he leaves everything else in his hands. Mino ran to ask her not to do it again in front of them. Shuda acknowledged the statement that even though he did not fully comprehend it at the time, he would shortly. At last, the youths found themselves abandoned. The grandparents strolled around for a while after realizing it was best to give them privacy. And they relished the breathtaking scenery. Even though his wife was 1,000 times more attractive in the grandfather's eyes, they took a brief break to enjoy each other's company and reflect as they ventured farther into his apple orchard. They had, after all, discovered that they had favorable weather. Thanks to Takahashi's private lessons, Shiori eventually decided to pursue a career in medicine. Additionally, they learned from their son that Takahashi's parents only discussed Shiori in his office when they visited. This made her realize that she hadn't sent anything to Wine in a while, so maybe some delectable apple. Moreover, it seemed that Akima had recovered from her illness. Yoshiaki's life had been made better by everyone around her, even if she had just secured a new job. This reminded her grandfather that the Gateball tournament was taking place the following week, and the grandmother also recalled that Kem and his family used to visit them during the summer to celebrate. Their grandchildren would have undoubtedly grown by then, and they were eager to see them. Seizing the opportunity, he inquired about his beloved's preferences. In the unlikely event that the grandmother granted her one wish without giving it any thought, she was confident that she didn't need a wish because she had everything she had ever wanted. Isu also had the same response, and both of them relished each other's company as they transformed back into their original forms. We also see the grandfather's clocks, which simply ran out of sand for them both, indicating that their time on Earth had come to an end and they had both passed away. This was not the end, though, because some of them lived on in her granddaughter, who in the end were always there and always provided something to laugh about. Lived in the young people who only occasionally stopped by to say hello, and who was determined to tend to her apple orchard with her life partner. The family's entire circle of friends, Life and his children, who would never forget them even though they were far away, and everyone else who ultimately shared a small part of his life. Thanks to his wish, he was able to pass away, not only simultaneously with his beloved, but also with her, by his side when his granddaughter showed up to ask them to supper. After a long day of labor, he discovered his grandparents both dozing off. Nevertheless, not all was lost. When they arrived at the old apple orchard in Mino, they saw that it had grown and that the golden morning of the past had returned for them once again. This is what we see happened about 50 years later in the apple orchard area. An old man ran through the orchard to call his wife. However, because so much time had passed, the elders lost track of what they were doing and just considered eating it, because it might taste good and nothing else. Just that, please subscribe to support the channel if you enjoyed it. Leave a comment. See you